Hey friend, welcome back to another episode of the Soul Podcasting Podcast, where passion, purpose, and podcast strategy come together to help you amplify your voice without all the burnout. I'm Demetria Zinga, founder of the Soul Podcasting Collective, a podcast production agency where I help solopreneurs launch and grow their podcasts confidently. I'm also a podcast coach and strategist, and I'm here to give you the tools, encouragement, and strategy that you need to build a podcast that's not just popular, but purposeful. So last time on the show, we dug into what it means to find your podcast voice. And if you missed that one, you can go back and listen on episode 79. It'll really shift how you think about downloads and long-term impact. But today, we're talking about something that every podcaster wants, and that's growth. And if you've noticed, I haven't talked a lot about podcast growth on this show just because I felt like my main piece of advice and intention for the years 2023 until now have been really to encourage you to start a show and to help you to be motivated to launch one if that's in your heart. Now, many of you that I've talked to have started your podcast, you're about to, and I've been hearing some great news from friends and those of you who have connection with me and are starting your own show, or maybe you're in the beginning stages of it. And so I'm really happy for you. And I want you to keep growing your show. So we're going to talk about podcast growth and what that means. It's not just quick hacks or viral moments, but it's the kind of intentional growth that actually sustains your podcast and moves your mission forward. This is the difference between starting a show and stopping within 6 months, or creating a podcast that lasts for the long haul because you're excited about what you're talking about and because you know that you're gaining the kind of traction with listeners that you set out to do. I'm not about sharing quick hacks and quick overnight success growth strategies because I don't believe they exist, and I don't believe that it's practical for the average podcaster. And so I'm here for those of you who are your everyday podcasters, and I talk to solopreneurs, but I also talk to those who have a heartbeat in ministry and nonprofit organizations who are not necessarily trying to make a quick buck, but really want to get your message heard. And so we're going to talk about what it means to grow your podcast in as many ways as are practical for me and how I can share with you on a reality basis. Because again, I'm not a guru and I'm not perfect at it. Even though I've been podcasting for 2 decades, I'm still learning new things and new strategies because podcasting is always evolving and there's always going to be something new, whether it's AI or another tool or a statistic that comes out to let us know where the wave of podcasting is going and how things are shaking out for podcasters in general. All of this is going to shape the way we show up on the microphone and the strategies that we use. So there is no, in my opinion, podcasting guru because we're all just really figuring things out as we go. That said, I do have all these years of podcasting under my belt and experience where I really want to help you figure out how to do these things, how to show up on the microphone, how to show up with integrity, how to show up with boldness and conviction about your message, and also how to utilize these tools that are best for your workflow, how to create a workflow that works around your schedule. These are the kinds of things that I like to share with your everyday solopreneur, business owner, thought leader, podcaster, right? And so again, I'm not just sharing quick hacks. I'm sharing things that I think are really going to help you. These are strategies that you've probably already heard in the podcasting world, but also I'm going to share with you how I'm personally applying these. So let's dig a bit deeper into what this podcast growth means for me, because this is the part that podcasters ask me about the most. And after the questions about launching and what tools do I use and how do I get started, it's about how do I maintain and how do I grow? So let's get something out of the way. There is absolutely no magic button. There's no one growth hack that's going to skyrocket your show overnight. But what actually works is layering strategies and being consistent long enough to see those results. And the ones that I've been leaning into and why they matter right now for me, the first one is going to be SEO, which is hands down. This is my long game for everything I do online. I run multiple brands, which consist of typically a blog and a podcast and an audience that gets their own unique newsletter for me on a monthly basis, sometimes every week, depending on the audience. And these different brands range from homeschooling to this particular show, which is podcasting, the Soul Podcasting Collective. And then there is one that I run called Her Business Elevated, which is for women solopreneurs. Take all of these different brands, and what I've done is create small-ish communities that revolve around the growth strategy of SEO, which has been my foundation for over a decade or so. So I truly believe that search engine optimization is important for everything we do online. And it is changing as well, just so you know that SEO is important, but we are going to have to really start looking at SEO as it relates to AI, but that's another topic for another day. But your podcast episode is not just a conversation, it is content, and this content can either disappear into the algorithm void or it can live on and keep working for you. And that's where SEO comes in. And I'll be honest, I used to slap on whatever title felt catchy and just move on. I'm guilty of having done that up until recently. In fact, as of lately, I've been going back into my back catalog and reworking my episode titles because I realized that when I created those titles, I was just in a hurry to get those episodes up so that we can move on to the next thing in my workflow pipeline. But I do understand and believe in the importance of SEO. So we're going back, and my team and I are working on creating those new episode titles, making sure that the show notes include keywords that people actually search for. This is not something that's fun. Is it glamorous work? Absolutely not. But it is worth it because podcast directories and Google are search engines. And if your episode is called episode 57, my thoughts on branding, probably nobody will find it, right? But if it's how to build a soulful brand that attracts your ideal client, if in fact your keyword strategy is to use ideal client throughout your content, suddenly that's searchable. It's something that when someone types in ideal client in Apple Podcasts, they're more likely to find your particular episode about that topic. And that's something people are actively typing in when they're looking for content. This is where AI also comes in handy. I will personally run all my transcripts through AI tools, pull out key phrases, brainstorm possible titles, and then I use my judgment to pick the one that sounds the most natural for my voice. And so I am using AI, but I try to be strategic about how I use it. So we've all been told to be everywhere, right? I personally have my brands everywhere. I have a presence on Google, a presence on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and I have tried a little bit of TikTok. That hasn't fleshed out for me, but I do have a presence in most places. I even have a Twitter account for one of my other brands. But again, these are not things that I'm using regularly. And even if we're told to be everywhere or have a presence everywhere, the reality is that most of us don't have the bandwidth for that. And even if we did, being stretched across too many platforms means you're not really connecting deeply anywhere. There are agencies who are large enough who are able to make sure that there's content and multiple facets and pieces of content in a variety of places all over the web and they're in all the places. And that works for a huge agency, but it does not necessarily work for a solopreneur or for an independent solo podcaster. So I recommend that you choose one or two platforms that you will connect with and engage deeply in that space. And that's why my main platform for 2025 has been Instagram. And it's where I've felt comfortable, it's visual, and it's where my audience naturally hangs out. I haven't always liked Instagram, to be honest. It kind of had to grow on me, but I like it now. And I do like being on LinkedIn as well. I'm also not really trying to be a LinkedIn thought leader, but I think it's a great place for me to put my energy. And so that's what I do. And then there's also YouTube. Earlier this year, I posted a handful of shorts, just experimenting. I wasn't consistent, unfortunately, but even with a few uploads, my channel did start growing. And that's when I realized, okay, YouTube rewards you for showing up even just a little bit. So I think for the upcoming year in 2026, I'm going to swing back around to YouTube again because that platform itself has a built-in search engine. That's where your content can live forever. So the point is, what I'm trying to say is stop chasing trends and just ask yourself, where do I want to show up consistently? Kind of keep the idea of SEO in mind as well, and making sure that you're establishing a foundation for your business, your podcast, wherever you are, right? So that it's not just getting caught up in the algorithm and in the feed, and maybe people see you, maybe they don't, but that you also have a place where you're creating a digital footprint online. And that's where search engine optimization helps out tremendously. And I'll be talking more about SEO throughout the upcoming year as I share more about the nuts and bolts of podcasting. I'm really excited to share more for those of you who are wanting to get into the nitty-gritty of how do I do this? How do I make this sustainable for me? And as much as I love sharing about thought leadership and what it means to think like a CEO, I realize that there's so much behind the scenes of podcasting where we do need that micro information to help us become the CEO that we want to be with our podcast. And so I'll be spending a bit more time in 2026 and beyond talking about those micro details that help you with your podcasting endeavors and hopefully creating a community around that. So we'll see how that goes, and definitely you'll be the first to know when that is released. But the next thing I want to share with you is about guesting, becoming a podcast guest as a strategy for growth. And this is a strategy that I don't think it's talked about enough. We do have a few people who focus on sharing about podcast strategy. I follow them on Instagram, and I had a guest here on Soul Podcasting that shared a bit about what she does for podcast strategy growth. And you can go back and listen to that episode. It would be Dr. Julie Marty Pearson, and that was on episode 70. But these are things that we can do to help us build our own audiences, as well as being a mutual benefit to other podcasters. So when you're a guest on another podcast, you're not just borrowing their audience, you're building a relationship with that host. And those relationships often lead to collaborations and referrals and opportunities that you honestly could not have planned for. And that's why I think being a podcast guest can really just kind of level the playing field for you, especially if you're just starting your podcast. This summer, I did what I like to call a mini podcast tour. It was just a few podcasts that I decided I wanted to be on their show and they wanted me. And so it was nothing formal, just a few guest spots on shows in my niche. So I found some podcasters that I admired or really wanted to have a deeper conversation with them. And it was super refreshing. And I wasn't worried about my own production schedule in those moments. I just got to show up, share my story, and connect. And listeners who resonated with me followed me back here to my show. So if you're looking for growth, you don't just obsess over your own feed. You get yourself onto other people's feeds and into other people's earbuds. So some of the shows that I was on, and I'll go ahead and share that with you real quick, just in case you're curious. And then of course, I'll leave a link to those in the show notes if you want to take a look at the interviews. But I was a guest on the How To podcast series with Dave Campbell. It's his episode 458. So I'll leave a link to that. I was also a guest on Rory Paquette's The Podcaster Nation, episode 130. I shared with Elise Halcombe on the Peaceful Mompreneur podcast, as well as on Wisdom's podcast. His podcast is called My Podcast Story. And I also shared with Carol Clegg's podcast, which is Connect, Inspire, and Create. So those are just a few shows that I was on this past summer just to share and to kind of be on the other end of things so that I'm not always the one who is running the interview and hosting, but getting used to being on the other side as a guest as well. All right. And the next thing I want to share with you is about using AI as your assistant and not your identity. So I'm going to say this: AI is not the enemy and it's not the savior. Those are two things that I feel like as podcasters, we need to constantly remind ourselves that we're not fighting AI, but we're also not relying on AI. It's just a tool. And when I say we don't rely on it, we use it, of course, which, it becomes part of our routine, but we don't rely on it for everything. Remember, we're using it to do the things that helps us to be more productive. For example, I use it for outlining my episodes, for writing drafts of show notes. I pull my transcripts so I can find those golden keyword phrases that make a perfect YouTube title. But the boundary for me is that AI doesn't touch the soul of my podcast. It doesn't replace my voice. It just helps me move through the admin parts faster so I can stay in my creative lane. And, for those of you who are interested in maybe exploring the boundaries, pushing the boundaries a bit and seeing what new and engaging things you can do with AI, by all means, go for it. Enjoy the journey. My husband is actually doing that right now with his podcast, and I find it fascinating. I wouldn't want to do it quite the way he does it, and he wouldn't want to podcast the way I do. We have very different ways that we podcast, but I admire what he's been doing using AI. And I just think it's very cutting edge, and I just can't even wrap my brain around it. But he does a great job with his show, which is Leadership and Success Podcast. He is doing recaps for all of his guests. And in his recap episodes, he uses AI to recap what he and his guests talked about. He uses the AI bots, and they are fed a script, and they are having a full conversation about the previous episode. So for those who don't have time to watch the full 30-minute or hour episode, they can listen to the 10 or 15-minute recap with the AI who are talking with one another. And it looks very much like they're in a studio and they're having this conversation together. And so I just find that so cutting edge and engaging, and yet it's not something that I would want to implement in my show, but super glad to see my husband traipse into that area. And so again, I don't see AI as replacing what he's doing. I see it as integrated into the whole of what he's doing, because he shows up consistently every single day to put out an episode. He's a daily podcaster, and he's there in person. And then there's also the AI that's there maybe a few times a week. So I love that he's doing this new thing that I never would have had the guts to or the courage to. But again, you do podcasting the way that is best for you, and that fits your personality and the soul of your brand and who you are. So the big 4 growth moves right now for me are SEO, intentional platforms, right? Finding the right places to be, podcast guesting, and AI support. For me, the AI support and all of this together is nothing too shiny or flashy, but they all work together, integrated into this system that works for me. Now, one of the biggest myths in podcasting is that your success equals your download numbers. And I know it's tempting because we want to log in and check the stats every single day. We keep refreshing the chart positions. That's normal to feel like we want to keep checking. But if that's all you're chasing, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, honestly, because the truth is podcasters with thousands of downloads per episode who aren't making a dime, I know these people, okay? They're sometimes not actually able to build real relationships with their audience, and they're feeling burned out. I know podcasters with just a few hundred loyal listeners who are thriving. They're landing speaking gigs. They're attracting clients. They're being invited into spaces that they never have imagined. And so it's not necessarily about the numbers. And so we're going to talk about impact instead of those numbers. So I was invited to speak on a panel because the organizer had listened to one episode of mine. They didn't care about my download count. They weren't asking me any questions about how many people listen. They only cared about the clarity of my message. And so that opportunity was open to me because of one show. And then several coaching clients have also found me through my podcast. They told me they listened to 1 or 2 episodes, whether it was through a podcast platform or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or they found me on YouTube. They found me somewhere, and they knew that I would be the right fit for them in coaching because of listening to just a few shows. And that is relationship building. You can't measure it in stats alone. So again, client trust is something that happens when you're able to build a relationship with your audience. And then there's thought leadership. Every time you publish an episode, you're essentially putting a little brick down in this house of your credibility, and people start quoting you back to yourself. They recommend your show to other people. That is authority and impact. And then let's not forget, sometimes your podcast is exactly what someone needs in that moment. You can change lives. Maybe it encourages them to start their own business. Maybe it helps them feel less alone. And that is transformation. And transformation does not require being viral. I've talked about that in a previous episode as well. Go back and check out episode 60, why visibility isn't about going viral, but it's about staying relevant. So if you're staring at your stats and you're thinking, oh, I need to be further along than where I am right now, I'm just going to say to you that your numbers are not the full story. It's your consistency, your clarity, and your alignment. Those are the real metrics that matter. One of the biggest shifts that I've made recently is really paying more attention to my SEO titles. So again, I'm going back to that, tightening things up in my older episodes, making sure my episode titles actually match what people are searching for, because the truth is, discoverability is a growth strategy all on its own. And alongside that, I'm keeping my energy focused on the platforms I really enjoy, mainly Instagram right now. And when I can, I'll get back into YouTube Shorts. But these little actions really do stack up if you give them time. So that's what I'll be working on in 2026. And something personal I don't talk about often is that a few years ago, I remembered looking at my podcast stats, and this is back when I first started Soul Podcasting. So around maybe 2022, near the end of that year, I started this podcast, and I realized that I had, over a few years, multiplied my growth by over 7,000%. So that means I went from this tiny handful of listeners monthly, maybe 3 to 5. Like I didn't have very many listeners the first couple of months that I started podcasting. And I just kept going and kept going. And then before long, we were averaging a few hundred every month. That moment when I saw that percentage growth showed me that I shouldn't dismiss the small beginnings. Even when it feels like no one's listening, that effort compounds in ways that you can't always predict. And since then, the growth has even continued. I'm still growing here. And I'm just along for the ride and enjoying this journey. So if you're sitting there thinking, okay, I only have 10 listeners right now, or 50, maybe 100, don't discount it. Don't discount it. Each one of those listeners is a real person choosing to spend their time with you. And that's where the foundation is built, my friend. All right, we're going to shift gears for just a moment, and it's time for our podcasting in the news segment. And this is something that I started doing at the beginning of the summer, but have not continued. So I thought, hey, I need to bring the podcasting in the news segment back. So here we go. According to PodMatch's 2025 podcast industry report, only about 10% of independent podcasters are considered actively established. The kicker is that 10% produces 95% of all the podcast listening. The translation here is that most people quit way too soon. But if you stick it out long enough to hit milestones like 100 episodes, you move into that more established category, and that's where the real growth and the real listenership happens. So that hit home for me because I've seen how much consistency matters even when I take breaks or if I rebrand. It's the fact that I keep showing up that creates results. And honestly, it's not just about stats, it's about community. And that's been true since the early days when I ran a Facebook group just for women podcasters. That group, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore, but today I still see the same sense of community through your emails, your replies to my newsletters, and the voice notes even that you leave me on SpeakPipe. Speaking of which, I want to give a special thank you to Sylvie from France. She left me the sweetest voice note about her future podcasting plans and with some words of encouragement, even a little song. So Sylvie, you made my week, and I will ask you for permission to see if it's okay if I play your voice note on my podcast next time. But side note for you guys, if you want to leave me a voice note, head over to soulpodcasting.com. There is a little tab on the right side of the screen. It's pink and there's a microphone there. It says, leave me a voicemail. Click on that and just start talking. And if you're okay with me playing it on the show, I'd be happy to, as well as leave a link back to your podcast. So here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. Growth isn't about being everywhere. It's about being consistent where it counts. Remember that SEO, guesting, and strategic platform use and platform strategy matter more than just chasing trends. Remember that downloads don't define your success, your impact does. And the community that you build around your podcast is your most valuable asset. All right, my friend, that is a wrap for today. And if you're ready to grow your podcast with intention, I've got a free resource just for you. It's called the Launch Confidently Podcasting Checklist. You'll get it when you sign up for my free newsletter over at soulpodcasting.com. I'm leaving a link, of course. And if you'd like some personalized insight, I'm also offering podcast audits right now. It's a great way to see where you can level up your show. Don't forget leaving me that voice note at Soul Podcasting. I love hearing from you. Might feature you on a future episode. And so again, thank you for hanging out with me today. Keep showing up, keep sharing your voice. And as always, my friend, keep podcasting with soul. Happy podcasting.